Recession may be on the cards in Europe. The rest of the world is likely to act as a counterbalance and will pull it out of the doldrums this year. It's delighted to say that Yianos Kontopoulos, who is CIO at Eurobank, and joins us now. Yianos, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, look, I just want to look at various reports. I've got two of your reports in front of me, one from January, one from April as well. And you're saying a speed bump in the bullish story was almost inevitable. You are bullish. You said back in January you're bullish, and against the general negative consensus, you're very bullish. Now, here you're saying a road bump on the upside story could absolutely happen at any time, and April's as good a month as any. So I'll take you at your word. Are you picking up a lot of assets, a lot of risk assets at this level now we've had this road bump?
Okay. Let me just qualify it by saying it has to be weird when the Greek guy in the room is the most optimistic around.
Well, it's very nice to see, to be honest.
So I have to think twice about what I say now. But in general, we had a pretty significant rally, very broad in scope and in size. And when I say speed bump, I'm trying to essentially qualify it as something different from what we've observed in 2010 and 2011, where basically the trend was less important and the variation around the trend was the much more important story. Essentially, the trend was near zero.
Yeah.
And I think 2012 is a story where we have actually the re-emergence of a trend upwards. Okay. And surprisingly enough, because most people by now have become more fearful and thus more conservative, less prone to think about something more important here, the variation around this trend, despite all this catastrophic talk that we've had, I mean, the Mayans have said that the end of the world is coming into 2012, we might have a trend and actually lower variation around that trend. So that lower variation is a speed bump. What is a major sell-off? For me, a major sell-off is actually when we have a sell-off in fixed income. So qualitatively, I'm looking at 2012 as a very different year than the last two.
Okay, so I think that's great, and it'll be very nice to have your optimism around the table. My only issue there is I'm looking back again at your January report, and your optimism came from the emerging markets. And I'll quote, emerging markets are, again, the promised land in equities. Aside from the BRICS, which are the natural choice, demographics and the emerging consumer likely render healthcare and EM a preferable sector for 2012 and beyond. My point being here is it was the emerging market story that you were most excited about, perhaps back in January as well. And I think that's where a great layer of concern has actually come over the market in April as much as anything else, because they're concerned about the growth story.
That's correct. I actually think that if we become a little bit more specific about what do we do now, if we believe my story for the rest of the year, is actually we'll probably have to overweigh emerging markets versus the real darling of the story here, which is the U.S. If you think about it in other terms, sector-wise, and I'm not an equity specialist, but at least I can see that far, is that you've had technology overtake materials. That's a much more important story so far in the year, which in essence is, if you think about it, the U.S. is much more capex intensive in technology as opposed to emerging markets, which are much more intensive in resources as they begin to grow. But overall, I think if we're going to have a good growth year, emerging markets has to be a very strong part of that. And again, I'm not saying that this is going to be a very strong year overall, but the prospects are emerging. Why? Because, just to say one reason, we have a global monetary easing for the second time in history. And many people have failed to realize that, at least in our minds, and they're going to be missing a very good year.
There's some odd things going on, though, aren't there? I mean, when you look at the market, you see technology in the States doing well, but you also see consumer staples doing well. So it's almost as though investors are hugging the exit door just because they don't trust what they're seeing in some of the improving data. If you chuck $2.5 trillion at the global economy, you are going to get an apparent cyclical response. So how confident should we be that your risk-on analysis works as we start to see developed world central banks think about rate cycle rises rather than continued cuts?
Well, I think the only one that has seriously proposed that so far is Canada, and they've just started thinking about it. The rest, I think they are, I don't think anybody can make a very serious argument about saying that the Fed has completely given up on the idea of thinking about easing towards the rest of the year. And I think that's part of the proposition here. If the data continue improving from a very low basis as opposed to last year, then everything is good, and I think people are going to get more comfortable with equity risk. If they don't, then I think the Fed has told us many times that they are willing and ready to take action. The Europeans have not told us that, but they have, and so on and so forth.
Go on.
So a continuous process of, just like Japan, where you used to fiscally stimulate and monetary stimulate, you'd have a burst of economic activity and then it would stop again.
Yeah.
Why is it a trend?
Well, the burst of economic activity is not now. I think all of us would agree about that, right? I mean, we're starting from a low base. So maybe it's towards the end of the year. So by that time, I'm happy to say, well, 2012 has been a great year. So I agree with you. It's not. I'm not trying to say that this is the end of our worries and everything is going to be fine years from now. But I think 2012 has the very right conditions to surprise us. And by the time it's over, I think it's probably going to be a missed opportunity.
But we can't ignore things like the 8-1 at the Bank of England, can we? I mean, wasn't that? I mean, you could read that April minutes as this is a reminder to the market that it's not a one-way story. We saw one of the Bank of England members switch away from wanting even more QE. He's dropped to one side. 8-1, doesn't that start to suggest that the process of thinking about a rise is now well and truly in place? There are enough Fed members, aren't there, who are saying, forget 2014, the rise is going to come much earlier. The market can't just dismiss the central bank prospects of tightening rates.
I agree, but I think we run into trouble if this is just an inflation story. If it is a nominal growth story, that is, there are growth elements here, then I think you first have to become much more optimistic and then become much more worried about what's coming next. So I agree with you. It is something to worry about. I think most of the market is worrying about it. It's not that forgotten about it. And I'm just saying relax for 2012.
You're in the middle of a sell-off. I suspect you buy this one. This is the difference there I am for agreeing. I think I can like it 10 and 11. The technical position was wonderful. You didn't have to be a genius to work out January was going up. No one owned anything. It wasn't hard to work out the technical position was supportive. But a longer-term cyclical, a secular bull market, not a hope. Nowhere near it yet, in my view. But there we go.
Yianos, I think we're going to thank you there, but thank you very much indeed for kicking off the conversation. And it's really great to see a very bullish Greek around the table as well.
It is.
Hoorah!
Thank you.
Yianos Kontopoulos is CEO at Eurobank.